In episode 7 of my Doodle Podcast series, I'm going to be discussing the topic of starting over on a new journey. I'll also be drawing another page from my upcoming Toad-themed coloring book. This doodle was inspired by the opening scene from the movie Oz the Great and Powerful. And just as the movie scene transforms from black and white into color, so will this image. Hey guys, Craig here. Hope everybody's doing well. Okay, so this episode of my Doodle Podcast series is going to have a little twist to it. Because the doodle was inspired by the opening scene of the movie Oz the Great and Powerful, which is one of my favorite movies, I decided that I wanted to go a little bit further than just creating a cute little doodle with a hot air balloon in it. I also wanted the hot air balloon to transform from black and white into color, just like it does in the movie. Now I could have painted the image myself, but then I wouldn't have been staying true to the movie. Because in the movie, the balloon actually leaves Kansas and ends up in some magical new land. So I thought it was only fitting that the doodle should leave my YouTube channel and go over to somebody else's. Which is why in this episode, I'll be collaborating with an extremely talented young artist by the name of Alexandra Pulga. Alexandra is a digital artist that has already begun to make a name for herself over on Instagram, but she's only just recently launched her YouTube channel. So I thought that this collaboration would be a great way to put some well-deserved attention onto her new channel. So once you finish watching me draw this doodle, be sure to head over to Alexandra's channel to watch her paint it using her own beautiful artistic style. And I'll put a link to her video in the description section of this video. And while you're over there, be sure to give her video a like, as well as check out some of her other videos. I have no doubt that Alexandra will become a huge YouTube artist in the coming years, so you may want to subscribe to her channel while you're there as well, just so that you don't miss any of her future videos. Okay, now that that's all taken care of, if you're ready, let's start doodling. I wanted the subject of this podcast to be about starting over because in my lifetime, I've personally started over more times than I can count. It seems like I've been in search of that elusive great white whale of careers pretty much my whole life. As a kid, all I wanted to do was have fun. And there were two areas of entertainment that I was addicted to as a child: music and cartoons. My entire childhood revolved around those two art forms. Now, as a young child, I was pretty much just a spectator. I couldn't draw to save my life, and I had no musical talent whatsoever. But that didn't matter, because the act of simply listening to music or watching cartoons sent me to a whole new world. Now, I think that my fascination with cartoons also had an influence on the type of music that I listened to, because as a kid, I was all in on the rock group Kiss. I had every one of their albums, and my bedroom walls were covered with their posters and magazine clippings. And I think it was the over-the-top cartoonish makeup that really drew me to them. And I'm really glad that it did. The Kiss album cover, Rock and Roll Over, was actually the reason that I started drawing in the first place. Now, if I'm being honest, I wasn't really drawing back then. It was more like tracing. But either way, it's what got me started. And as I got better at drawing and began to do it from sight, I became addicted to it. Being able to draw allowed me to connect to cartoons in a way that I'd never been able to do before. It actually gave me a whole new appreciation for the art of animation. And it wasn't long before I was drawing on any blank piece of paper that I could find. My school notebooks had far more doodles in them than text. I hated school, but I understood that it was the one mandatory thing in my life that I had to take seriously. I didn't like serious things as a kid. I only wanted to do fun things. And that's why every day after school I would run home, go up to my bedroom, listen to my Kiss records, and start drawing. That was my fun time. But I realized very early on in life that the odds of being able to make a living drawing cartoons were very slim. Back in my day, cartoon illustrators only had a few options when it came to finding work. You could move to California and try to get a job with an animation studio like Disney or Warner Brothers. But that would have meant that I would have had to move away from my friends and family. And as a 12-year-old, I just wasn't ready to do that. You could also get a job with an advertising company creating ads for magazines, or with a publishing company drawing covers for novels. But both of those careers would require you to move to a big city. Again, as a 12-year-old, big cities scared me. The last option was to get a contract with a syndicate to create comic strips for daily newspapers. Back then, getting syndicated as a comic strip artist was about as easy as winning the lottery. Being an artist back then wasn't like it is today. You couldn't just open up an Instagram account or create a YouTube channel and then through print on demand or self-publishing platforms sell your artwork to the public. It was far more difficult to make a living as an artist back then, and that's why drawing was only allowed after my homework was done. Drawing would never be anything more than a hobby, and that became even more apparent to me as I got older. But drawing was the one thing that I truly enjoyed doing, so I continued doing it whenever I could. Although I was able to take part in cartoons through drawing, I was never really able to have that kind of connection to music until my teenage years. Because when I became a teenager, I found one more thing that made me very happy: girls. And girls like musicians. I still remember the first song that I learned to play on the guitar. It was Turn Me Loose by Loverboy. I probably wasn't playing it properly, but I didn't care. When the music was cranked really loud, that distorted guitar sounded like a choir of angels to me. Over time, I would eventually switch over to bass guitar and became fairly good at it. I played in a few different bands throughout my high school years, but it wasn't until my graduating year that I got involved with a serious band. We were so serious that we even recorded original music in a professional recording studio. And that's when things started to change for me. You see, up until then, playing music was a fun thing for me. I never really took it seriously. I loved playing on stage and feeling like a rock star. In the early days, the bands that I was with were only playing at talent shows and school events, so we were never really playing more than 9 or 10 songs at a time. And that was great for me because it meant that I only needed to learn about 30 songs in total. Those 30 songs would enable us to play a different set at every event. But after I hooked up with serious musicians, they wanted to transition into the bar circuit and start playing 3 and 4 hour shows with multiple sets. And since they didn't want to play the exact same show at every bar, that meant that I would have to learn over 100 songs. You see, playing on stage was fun for me, but sitting alone in my room practicing hour after hour wasn't. The whole music thing was about to turn into a serious job, and I still wanted to have fun, so I quit the band. Now, during my final years of high school, I had a few different part-time jobs, or what I would call serious jobs. And like all serious jobs, they weren't very fun. I worked in a department store as a stock boy. I worked as a dishwasher and a prep cook in a seafood restaurant. I even sold overpriced vacuum cleaners door to door. That job really sucked. And every time that I found myself getting sick of the job, I would just quit and start over at a new one. When I finally graduated from high school, I thought it would be best if I went directly into college. I knew that if I had taken a year or two off, that I'd probably never end up going at all. The problem was that I really had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. You know those orientation days that colleges hold to try and entice new students to enroll in one of their programs? It was at one of those events that I decided on the profession that I was going to pursue in life. I must have sat in on the orientations for at least 10 different programs, none of which even mildly piqued my interest. I was actually about to leave when I opened the last lecture room door to see a room filled with about 200 girls and only 3 guys. I had no idea what the program was, but I liked the odds, so I sat in. It turned out to be a travel and tourism program. To be honest, even after the orientation, I still had no idea what travel and tourism graduates actually did for a living. I guess I just assumed they led groups of people on guided tours of museums and stuff. At that point, I didn't really care. I just knew that my class was going to be made up of about 95% girls and 5% dudes. And that sounded like it would be a lot of fun, so I enrolled. I ended up dropping out after the first year. Although partying with all of those girls at the pub was great, I found the course load itself to be mind-numbingly boring. Tourism was definitely not for me. But that year wasn't a total write-off. One thing that I did learn about myself during that time was that I really enjoyed being in bars surrounded by a bunch of intoxicated people. So after I dropped out, I got myself a bartending job at one of the busiest local bars in town, and I loved it. I had found a job that not only paid me money, but was actually fun to do. And even though I only worked 4 days a week, I made really good money in that industry. I bought my first 2 houses while I was working in bars, and I was always driving a new car. Even though deep down I knew it wasn't the serious career that I'd always envisioned myself doing, it checked off a lot of the boxes of what that career should look like, so I ended up staying with it for over 14 years. But every family reunion, I would be reminded that this wasn't considered by most people to be an actual career. Without failure, at least a handful of my relatives would chime in at some point during the evening and ask me when I was going to get a real job. But the great thing about working in the bar industry is that you get a 3-day-long weekend every week and you get your daytimes off. This schedule gave me a lot of free time to continue my search for that elusive, serious career that was not only fun, but rewarding as well. And I tried pursuing a lot of different career options during my time working in bars. Because I had so much free time, as well as an expendable cash flow as a result of my tips, I decided to give income properties a try. I had watched so many do-it-yourself renovation shows on the Home and Garden television that I was sure I could make a go of it. So I bought my first income property and kicked off my journey to become a land baron. I put off growing the traditional handlebar mustache and wearing the monocle and top hat just like the old man in the game Monopoly, but nevertheless, I was on my way. After successfully renovating my first house, I began to think that maybe real estate was my true calling. So in true start-over fashion, I went and got my real estate license. Now initially, I had no intention of being a real estate agent. I just wanted to know what agents knew when they negotiated contracts and agreements. But after getting my license, I thought to myself, why not be a real estate agent? That question was answered for me during the first 2 weeks of working at RE/MAX. Real estate agents work really hard for their money, way harder than I ever want to work at anything. I was told that I held the record at RE/MAX for having the shortest career as a real estate agent. I had quit that job so fast that the ink on my business cards hadn't even had time to dry. I liked buying and renovating houses, but real estate sales was definitely not for me. So once again, it was time to start over. Now my next career endeavor was inspired by the movie Boiler Room. You know, the one with Ben Affleck and Giovanni Ribisi? I loved that movie. So much so that I decided to get my investments license. Now just to be clear, I didn't get it so that I could rip people off like they do in the movie. I just thought that being around all of that money might be something that I would enjoy. Turns out, I was wrong. Again. This may sound naive, but I was really surprised at just how much math was involved in investing. And I hate math. I did the job for about 6 months, but really didn't like the whole sales aspect of it. Trying to convince people to invest their hard-earned money with you is way harder than they make it look in the movies. It was probably for the best though, because I really don't like wearing a suit. Over the 14 years that I worked in the bar industry, I attempted to jumpstart a few different serious careers. In fact, at one point, I even went back to university on a part-time basis. My plan was to major in psychology and minor in sociology. But after the first year, I realized quickly that that was going to be a really long and expensive road to travel. So once again, I decided to start over. It's weird, I trained for all of these professions and yet the only thing that I was really getting good at was quitting and starting over. But eventually, I realized that if I truly wanted to succeed at any of these serious careers, I was going to have to get rid of my safety net. Now I personally think that working in the bar industry can be a viable career choice, just as long as you don't get caught up in the lifestyle. But I did. And after 14 years, my liver was telling me that it was time to get out. So I cut the ropes of my safety net and tried starting over one more time. Now because I wouldn't have the bar income to fall back on, I knew that whatever job I took was going to have to be full-time. And because I really didn't want to sell off any of my income property to go back to school, I decided to just take an entry-level position in a warehouse. At the time I took the job, the warehouse was owned by FedEx. But after a year of working there, the ownership would eventually change over and the warehouse would become exclusive to John Deere. Now I started at that warehouse as a material handler, and over 8 years would work my way up to afternoon shift supervisor, which was about as high as I could go with this particular company. This was my first serious job that I'd ever had in my life. And if I'm being honest, the one box that it definitely did not check off on my list for the elusive serious career that was also fun was the fun box. It's not that it was a bad job, it's just that I think the only thing that made that job tolerable was the crew of guys that I was supervising. If it wasn't for them, I think that job would have sucked. But I still needed that element of fun in my life, so I went back to the drawing board in my spare time, literally. Up to that point, I had always drawn traditionally using pen and paper, but I decided that it was time to give digital drawing a shot. Now I had no clue as to how to get started as a digital artist. At that time, I had never even heard of Adobe software, and I certainly didn't know what a drawing tablet was. So the first software program that I attempted to draw digitally with was made by Corel, and it was a program called Zara. Because I really didn't know what a drawing tablet was, I started off just using my mouse. The way Zara worked was kind of like the way the pen tool works in Illustrator. You simply place an anchor point somewhere on your artboard, and then place a second anchor point somewhere else. After placing the second anchor point, a stroke would then bridge the gap between the two anchor points. And then using your cursor, you would be able to manipulate the line into whatever shape you wanted using your mouse. It was kind of a rudimentary way of drawing, but it got the job done. I actually became pretty proficient with the software, so much so that I started my own online webcomic. It was called Life with Craig, spelled K-R-E-G. Over the 2 years that it was online, it had actually developed quite a decent fan base. I even self-published my own comic book that I sold on Amazon. Although it was a lot of fun to draw, in the end, I just couldn't maintain it, so I eventually took it down. In hindsight, I'm really glad that I did. The humor in my comic was really politically incorrect. Had I left it online, I probably would have been crucified by the woke mob years later. And just as my webcomic came to an end, so would my career in warehousing. The warehouse I worked at ended up downsizing after John Deere decided to pack up their Canadian operations and move to Mexico. After that happened, I had a decision to make. I could keep working in logistics and get a job at another warehouse, or I could just start over again. Because my job as a warehouse supervisor wasn't exactly what I thought my dream career should look like, I decided to start over. But this time, whatever serious career I chose was going to have to check off all of the boxes. And the only way that I could be sure that whatever I chose would have everything that I was looking for in my ideal career was if I built that career from scratch. So I went back to school. Now, the only thing that I'd ever really enjoyed doing throughout my life was drawing. So I knew that if I wanted my new career to be fun, it would have to be art related. But at the same time, it would still need to have the potential to generate the income of a serious career. So in the end, I decided to go back to college and study 3D animation. Now, since I was a kid, I've always been a fan of 2D animation. Warner Brothers, Disney, Hanna-Barbera, you name it, it didn't matter which studio was creating it, I loved it. And when Pixar got the whole 3D animation ball rolling, I was on board with that as well. So enrolling into a program that taught what was probably going to be the future of animation just seemed like a really smart idea. And right from the very first day of school, I loved it. I had never been so excited to go to class every day as I was during those 2 years at college. I just couldn't get enough of the subject. Our teacher gave us these in-class work periods to allow us to finish our projects on time. But I would always finish my projects at home so that I could just spend the entire 3-hour class picking my teacher's brain, just trying to get as much information out of him as I possibly could. Now, fortunately, one of my teachers saw some potential in me and recommended me for a position as an animator with the Research and Development Department of the college. This allowed me to gain extremely valuable work experience while I was still going to school. I kept that position right up until I graduated, and luckily, the college offered me a chance to stay on with a 2-year contract. And that wasn't even the best part. The college just happened to be a founding member of a business incubator that was designed to help out new tech companies. It was called the Generator at One and consisted of one entire floor with nothing but office after office of startup tech companies. We had everything from game development to film production companies in there. And as the representative for the research department of my college, I had my own office with huge windows and a great view of the city. It was like a dream come true. This was literally the first time in my life that I couldn't wait to get to work every day. Not only was I learning a lot from my boss and mentor, but I was also surrounded by some of the most incredibly talented digital artists in the industry. Having this wealth of knowledge at my fingertips every day was what allowed me to eventually start my own 3D animation company within just 1 year of being at that office. I was given free rein by the college to not only work with some incredible clients that were brought in through the research department, but was also allowed to use the office to service my own clients as well. They even let me hang my own business sign on the wall of my office. And the entire tab for that office was being picked up by the college. Not having any overhead allowed me to take on some incredible projects that would probably have been way too risky to take on if I had rent to pay every month. As a result, my business grew very quickly, and I managed to land some amazing clients that I would continue to work with for many years to come. I kept my 3D animation company running for over 10 years, and as far as jobs go, this was easily the best 10 years of my life. But as the old saying goes, all good things must come to an end. After 10 great years, I unfortunately had to close my business due to medical reasons. Now, I'm not going to get into those reasons in this video, but if you're interested in learning more about it, I go into a lot more detail in episode 3 of my Doodle Podcast. I'll put a link to that video at the end of this one. The point is, I was going to have to start over again. There are 2 reasons why people start over in life. The first is because they want to, and the second is because they have to. Starting over because you want to is great. You're so looking forward to the change that you can't help but be filled with motivation, inspiration, and curiosity. But when you have to start over, it's a whole different ballgame. The emotions you experience in this situation are usually fear, anger, and desperation. It's not a great feeling to have everything that you worked so hard for come crashing to the ground. But when you don't have any other options, your only choice is to start over. So that's what I did. Now, when this initially happened, it took me about a year just to get my health back. So for the first year, I wasn't even thinking about what I was going to do next as far as a career was concerned. But thankfully, due to my past experiences of starting over, I was able to pinpoint exactly what I did and didn't want to do as a career. And that's actually one of the bonuses of starting over later in life. You tend to have a wealth of knowledge to fall back on to help you make that choice of what to do. When you're starting over in your 20s and 30s, you don't really have a lot of past experience to pull from. And this is the reason why so many of us tend to make decisions on a whim at that age. It's because the only way to get that experience is to try and fail. But the good news is, if you're going to make any mistakes in life, the best time to do it is when you're still young and have fewer responsibilities. Which is why I believe that starting over in your younger years can be quite beneficial to you in your later years. During the time that I had my 3D animation company up and running, I was also given the opportunity to teach 3D animation at the college that I graduated from. That experience made me realize that teaching was something else that I truly loved to do. So once I had finally gotten my health back on track and I was able to decide on a new career path, I had a very clear picture of what my new career should look like. I was no longer on the hunt for that elusive white whale of a career that I'd been chasing my whole life. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. All I had to do was find a way to fit all of the bits and pieces together in a way that would allow me to have the career of my dreams. I took all of the experiences from my past job endeavors and weeded out all of the things that I didn't like. Then I just took everything that was left over and constructed a Frankenstein-style career for myself. I took my strengths like drawing, video editing, graphic design, and teaching and coupled them with things that I wasn't quite as strong in, like public speaking and sales. Then I just sat down and fine-tuned everything until I had it all mixed together in the right ratios. I'm far better at teaching than I am at selling, and this is why my videos are predominantly made up of tutorials with just a splash of sales pitch in them. You've probably noticed that other content creators on YouTube who cover content similar to mine tend to spend more time on camera. I'm not good at that, and that's why I tend to use more B-roll in my videos. Every piece of content on my YouTube channel is just a collage of my past experiences thrown together to create my ideal career. The key to being successful when starting over is just knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are and then capitalizing on them. Starting over can be the greatest experience of your life, or the worst experience. It's all about perspective. So regardless of your age or your reason for starting over, don't be afraid of it. Your life is a novel, and starting over is not the end of the book. It's simply the end of a chapter. Although the process can be overwhelming at times, more often than not, the experience will turn out to be the best thing that has ever happened to you. So if you're faced with having to start over, then just embrace it. Turn that page and get on to the next chapter in your life. All books eventually come to an end, and there are only so many chapters in life. So do your best to make those chapters as exciting as possible and to make your life story one that's worth reading. Alright, I think I tortured you enough with my life story. So now I'm just going to let you watch the rest of this doodle with nothing more than a little background music. But before I do, I want to remind you to head over to Alexandra's YouTube channel after you finish watching this video so that you can watch her bring my funny little doodle to life with some brilliant color. I'll have a link to her video in the description section below this video. Alright, that's enough talking. Enjoy. Okay, so if you've been thinking about starting over but you just haven't been able to pull the trigger, then hopefully this video and my story will in some small way help you to muster up the confidence to just take the leap and go ahead and do it. Now be sure to head over to Alexandra's channel to watch her bring this doodle to life by adding some color to it. I'll have a link to her video in the description section below. And if you want to check out additional episodes of my Doodle Podcast series, you can find a link to that playlist right here. Until next time, take care.